If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what is the most creepy, unexplained event that has happened in your life? Weirdest thing I've ever experienced. I live in a small mountain town and it takes 3 hours and 4 mountain passes to get to the nearest city. Pre-COVID I made that drive 2 to 3 times a month, over a period of 10 years. I pretty much had the curves and climbs committed to memory. One night I'm making the drive at 2 a.m. to catch an early flight. Cruising the curves and enjoying the lack of semi-trucks. Left curve, right curve, no, there's a big sweeping curve to the left coming up when all of a sudden I'm driving on a straight road. I'm well aware there isn't a straight section on that highway for another 30 miles. So immediately I'm looking around trying to figure out where the hell I am. Not a single highway sign on the side of the road. Smacked myself a few times to make sure I hadn't fallen asleep. Phone has no service, but that's normal, so I can't check my location. Looking out the window I realize the high desert scrub trees have been replaced with a thick forest. Imagine your headlights pick up dark, heavy, can't see 10 feet, forest that I would imagine in the Pacific Northwest. Something that we don't have here. I'm looking at the clock and for 15 minutes I'm driving on a straight road through this ominous dark forest when I should be on a curvy mountain pass in the desert. Right about the time I'm going to have a full-on panic attack, that sweeping left curve appears and I'm out of the forest back in the scrub. So I chalked it up to drowsy driving and an overreactive imagination until it happened again. 2 years later, same spot except this time I'm not alone. I had my brother riding shotgun on a similar airport run, and all of a sudden on the straight road. That time it only lasted about 5 minutes before my brother looked around and asked, "Where the hell are we?" Cue the sweeping left curve appearing and back in the desert. Even though I can't explain it, I'm at least grateful I had a witness. My uncle used to have a cabin in the woods near Winter, Wisconsin on a relatively undeveloped arm of the Chippewa flowage. Not too remote that you couldn't pop into town for necessities, but far enough in the boonies that if you got hurt you'd be in serious trouble. I used to spend time there in the summer tearing through the woods with my 2 cousins. One morning when I was about 10 my uncle woke us up roughly and told us it was time to go fishing. It was still super early and we were all confused because it was pitch dark and who the hell went fishing so early anyway? He hustled us down to the dock where he kept his little fishing boat and quickly launched us into the water and away from the house. At this point we were all getting a little freaked out by the weirdness of the situation. We thought maybe we were being punished because my uncle had gone to chop wood the previous morning and couldn't find his axe anywhere. He'd left it lodged in a stump next to the cabin and accused us of messing with it, which, to be fair, sounded like something we probably would have done. He ended up having to drive into town to buy a new one. He wasn't talking, though. We just sat shivering under a blanket at the bow of the boat while my uncle stared wild-eyed at the shoreline and waved a flashlight furtively ahead of us. We eventually arrived at my uncle's friend's cabin across the lake and tumbled into his house. Our uncle sent us to the loft to sleep and he and his buddy locked the doors and left, not returning until well after sunrise. Eventually our uncle showed up with the truck and trailer already packed with all of our gear and told us it was time to go home. We all thought it was weird that we were leaving the cabin days early, but we were kids so we just went with it. My uncle was quiet for the whole long drive back to civilization. Many years later my uncle confided to me that the reason he'd hustled us home was because he'd woken up around 3 a.m. to a strange thunk sound from outside the cabin. He'd gone out to investigate when a massive jack pine fell directly across the narrow driveway, blocking us in. Startled by the noise, he swept his flashlight along the tree line just in time to see a man holding an axe slink away into the dark of the wood. He and his buddy had to take turns chainsawing the tree apart while the other stood watch with a rifle. He never found the axe. I spend a lot of times in the woods and hiking. I do not believe in Bigfoot or any unexplained wild animals. In the moment though, I fully understand why those stories exist. I was hiking in Georgia off the Appalachian Trail. It was one of those foggy mornings. So foggy in fact when I first was hiking I ran into a flock of wild turkeys, what simply does not happen. They were so close in fact I could have touched them with my walking sticks until they took off into the fog. 15 minutes later, I heard a growl that sounded like it came from the devil himself. It growled 2 to 3 times. Kind of sounded monkey-like but waded deep and I have looked over the internet to see if I could recognize that sound. I have not. It caught me completely off guard. I positioned myself between a tree and the sound, using my walking stick like a spear and the tree like a shield in case it attacked me. I started shouting like you are supposed to, especially if it is a black bear. Which really does work. In that moment I believed every scary story you hear from around the campfire. Luckily I heard whatever run off. To this day the logical side of my head knows it was nothing abnormal, but in that moment, it was fucking Bigfoot. If it was 1975 I could totally see me going down that rabbit hole and talking about the time I heard Bigfoot in a morning fog. Driving in rural areas in New England, near the borders of Vermont and Mass, so I am not sure which one I was in. It was late. Well okay, so late it was actually early. And there was fog, dense fog. Like Silent Hill levels of fog. And like an idiot who dies in the opening scene of a horror movie, I am driving on back roads. First my headlight just up and goes out, cannot use high beams because of fog. I am in the middle of nowhere, I haven't seen a house or town in a long time. Car starts making noise, check engine light comes on. So I pull over, nothing much around, field and fog and dark. Creepy as hell. I gamely look at the engine, I can fix electronics, not engines. I tighten all the things I know. Car now won't start. So I am in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road. Because of the natural rules of how things work, my cell phone has no service as well. It is like one big cliche. But I am not stupid enough to go wandering the roads right now. So I recline my seat and decide to take a nap for a couple hours until the sun comes up. I wake up, the sun is coming up, the fog is going away. And I am in on the main street of a tiny town, parked in front of what looks like the Bates Motel house. Houses everywhere. It was the creepiest feeling. I was sure and off in the woods. There was not a light on in any house all night. There was a service station 50 yards up the road. I walked up to it, talked to the guy, who looked perfectly normal. He walked over to look at the car, asked me to try to start it. And it did. Fucking thing turned over right away. And both headlights were working. I drove on, never got the name of the little village, and I couldn't find it on a map. I always felt like I was in this big setup for a horror movie that just didn't pan out. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend. He had a doctor's appointment and took his dad with him. It was in another town about an hour away, and since the appointment was for 11 a.m., they left at 9:30 to give themselves plenty of time. They pulled into the parking lot at 10:30. My friend said he remembered checking the clock in the car when they arrived, and remarking to his dad that they made good time. They went into the office, and the receptionist pointed out that they were a little late, but that it was okay because the doctor was running behind. My friend told her that he had an 11 o'clock appointment, and that he was actually a half hour early, and she pointed to the clock on the waiting room wall, which said 11:15. His dad checked his watch. 11:15. My friend ran out and checked the clock in the car. 11:15. Somehow, in the few dozen steps from the car to the office, they'd lost 45 minutes. When they got home, my friend's mom verified that they'd left home at 9:30, and there hadn't been heavy traffic or delays of any kind. It's a mystery to this day. One time when I was younger, I was upstairs in my room playing some games on a PlayStation. I was home alone because both of my parents had gone out to see a movie. It was a fairly normal night with nothing out of the ordinary happening until I heard an extremely loud crashing noise and what sounded like glass shattering coming from the kitchen area. I immediately went downstairs to try and see the source of the noise. I checked all of the windows, and they showed no signs of damage. Confused, I kept walking around trying to find the source of this loud crashing noise until I walked over to the kitchen. I don't know how this happened, but apparently the outer glass screen of our oven just completely fell off and shattered. Slightly terrified, I proceeded to sweep up all of the glass and throw it away. I tried explaining the situation to my parents when they got home, but they didn't believe my story and grounded me for a week because they thought I broke it. To this day I still have no clue what caused the oven screen door to shatter like that, and it's one of the biggest unexplained mysteries in my life. My dad and stepmother got married when I was 10 years old at a countryside estate which is now a wedding venue. The other kids and I were playing hide and seek in this massive house, every kid's dream, when my sister, 12 at the time, was chasing my younger cousin, 7 at the time, who had long blonde hair wearing a blue dress down a long hallway. Halfway down the hallway the younger cousin dips into this old spiral staircase that only goes up a quarter rotation before it's blocked off with a wall. My sister jumps round the corner and shouts "Gotcha!" Except nobody was in this blocked staircase. She runs back to my dad crying saying that our cousin disappeared through a wall and everyone laughed it off because said cousin was right next to her. Fast forward 5 years, I'm 15 and I get a job as a waiter at the same wedding venue. The estate has an orangery, which is where they hold the ceremonies, and I notice a small stained glass window depicting a blonde-haired girl wearing a blue dress with the dates 1931 to 1937 underneath her. Naturally, I'm dumbfounded, so I ask about the stained glass window. The venue manager tells me that after being sold by the original owner, the estate was a boarding school for girls. She tells me that a young girl fell out of a top floor window and sadly passed away. The hallway that my sister chased my cousin down was an old servants' hallway, and the staircase was the central staircase that leads directly up to the old girls' dormitories on the top floor. Spooky. Learned a lot about the house during my 5 years working there, nothing else spooky but plenty that is very, very interesting. I work for a funeral company. One afternoon I did a viewing for a man who was having his funeral the next day. Usually at the end of the day we put the bodies back in the fridge, but because we'd been really busy, and I was at a small branch, we only had a very small fridge and it was already full, so on the rare occasion, if they've been embalmed, we'll leave them in the chapel with the air conditioner cranked up because we have good security systems, and who wants to break into a funeral home anyway? So the next morning I'm the first one in and I walk into the chapel and the man is out of his coffin laying face down on the floor. Not sprawled, but perfectly neat, like he'd floated up out of his coffin, turned face down, and floated down to the ground. Obviously I had a heart attack and my first thought was someone had broken in and done this, or were staff members playing a prank. A very sackable prank, and I can't imagine any of our staff doing that for any reason. And what's more, we have security cameras and motion detectors and swipe cards so you can see who has come and gone, but there was nothing. According to the security, no one came in or left that night. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we don't have security cameras in the chapel. And if you're thinking the guy wasn't really dead, I'm not in a third world country. He was dead, he had been embalmed. You don't tend to survive an embalming. So yeah, it was a massive investigation and no one could explain how he ended up like that. It still gives me the creeps every time I go in there. This is more of an extended story than a single event, but here it goes. Ever since I was a kid, I believed my childhood home was haunted. I'm more of a skeptic now, but weird things always happened in that house. The most memorable was when I was about 5 or 6 years old and woke up in the middle of the night to see a woman hanging in the center of my bedroom. She was hung with a chain and her neck was cut from it. She looked to be in her teens and was very dirty and grimy looking. I remember it very vividly because it terrified me. I blinked, and she was gone. Everything seemed normal. Weird shit would happen throughout the night. Back then we were a functional family, and we would eat dinner together and stack our plates in the sink and let them soak so my mom could wash them in the morning. In the middle of the night we would randomly hear said porcelain plates topple over in the sink. Some even broke. It used to keep me up at night, but you get used to it after a while. You would constantly get the feeling you were being watched. When I was around 15 I saw a large shadow figure in the corner of my room whispering to itself. That freaked me out. In that same bedroom a few months later I was in bed trying to sleep and I suddenly felt weight pressing into the bed around me, like someone was crawling in next to me. Obviously no one was there. A few months later I heard someone whisper into my ear late at night in the kitchen, pulling an all-nighter as high school kids do. I spun around, fists up, no one there. The problem was the worst. After my parents had moved to their farm, I moved out but had to move back in because life's a bitch. So I was on that house all alone. I would hear extremely loud bangs, crashes and such, with no evidence of anything being out of place. With it only being me, most of the furniture and stuff was gone, so there was really nothing in the house to cause such noises. It slowly began to really drive me crazy. I would hear something and just turn in its direction and say, "Would you shut up? Or could you fucking not?" Needless to say, that house had a very negative impact on me, and it nearly ended in myself forever sleep a few years back. I have since moved out, gotten help, and never looked back. My life is much better now. Back in 2002, my whole family vacationed at a cabin site on Fair Lake, Michigan, near Kalamazoo. I was only 1 year old, so I have no personal story, but of the 15 people with us over the course of the stay, almost every single one had some odd experience. I'll begin with the rationalizable stories, then the ones I can't explain. Pretty much everyone says they constantly had a bad energy feeling, and felt like they were being watched. The lights were constantly going out throughout the stay, and someone had to go in the basement to reset the breaker. I think this may be just poor wiring in the old cabin personally, but it was oddly frequent. My aunt says she was sleeping when all of a sudden, a ghost was in front of her, punching her and yelling, "Get out." My mom says she was pretty drunk that night though. My grandpa was sleeping in the front parlor, when, around the early morning, he saw a prism floating outside near the lake. He went out to look, but when he was outside, it wasn't there. I wonder if it was just a sunlight reflection though. My uncles, who were in their 2030s, had slept outside in a camper. One night, my uncle was sleeping until he was woken up by someone striking the camper from the outside. He called out, "Yeah, nice try," but all my uncles woke up too and replied, "It's not us, man, we hear it too." They say they all sat there for a few minutes until the pounding stopped. When I asked them today, none of them say they did it, but since everyone by this point was aware of the odd occurrences, one of them may have played a prank and banged on the camper. My dad and uncle were inside talking late at night when a door suddenly slammed. My mom says there was no way wind could have made the door move, since it was an interior door and wasn't windy. My dad doesn't like to talk about this experience for some reason. My mom was tucking me and my sister in for the night, and while she was leaving, heard a child laughter. She says the laughter came from another room and sounded nothing like us. One night, my cousin locked my uncle's keys in his truck. My uncle called a non-emergency number and a police officer came to get the car unlocked. While doing so, and nobody in the cop car, the police lights suddenly turned on. When my family asked about this, the officer responded, "Yeah, weird stuff seems to happen around here." About 10 years ago I was sitting in my room and I heard my doorknob slowly turning. I thought it was my dad seeing if I was napping and trying to be quiet. I watched the knob turn and heard the springs and the mechanism squeaking and then the sound of the latch slide off the metal plate as it was pushed open a bit, and I sat up to greet my dad and ask what he needed. I didn't see anyone, and then the door moved like it was pushed again and it opened more. Only for me to clearly see my dad in the living room sitting on the couch. This was so significant to me that I wrote down the time and exactly what happened. I didn't keep a diary or anything like that, I just couldn't explain it. The door was shut all the way and latched properly, and the air kicking on or another door opening would have sucked the door shut as it had many times before. At the time, I was also seeing a shadow figure peer around my doorframe. About 6 feet tall, solid black, all of my family is like 5 feet 7 inches or under and very white, and the side it peeked from was about 3 inches from doorframe to wall. No one could fit there and it would just stare at me in my bed leaning in and out of view. Shared this once before, but I have one of these. About 10 years ago back in high school I was driving my dad's old 88 S10 to work on a back road in my hometown. On this road there is a house with a bunch of chickens that run around the yard. On this day they were all on the side of the road and one ran into the street as I'm going by and I couldn't stop in time. I hear the big bay bump and crunch that you never want to hear. I instantly cringe and felt horrible. I was late so I couldn't stop, but for the next 5 miles to work the tire was jumping like the chicken was stuck to it, so I thought there would be a huge mess when I got to work. I get there and the tire, well, everything is spotless. Not a feather in sight. So now I'm confused as hell. There was no bump in the road that could have caused the jump in the tire or sound like that. Also, what the hell was stuck on my tire making it jump then? And it wasn't broken suspension because it went away pretty quickly. Here's where it gets weird. I forgot something at home and had to drive back by the house again. As I'm driving by, right where I hit the chicken, is a chicken on the side of the road 50 feet away from the other chickens, standing there like a statue. It doesn't look hurt at all and it's not moving at all, it's just staring me down with little beady eyes full of hate that you can feel. I drove back by again 10 minutes later on the way back to work and there is the same damn chicken. All the other chickens are gone and this one is just standing there staring at me like a damn poltergeist. It may have just been another chicken and the other one just flew somewhere else on the side of the road, but either way it freaked me out. Don't remember if I said this story before, but it was when my hubby was sick and I had to travel to another city to take care of him. He traveled to another city for work which wasn't that far from where we lived, and he was staying at his uncle's condo. My hubby is one who tries to power through everything, so when he called me and said he needed me I went. I arrived at the condo and found him in the living room asleep. So I go to gently wake him up and let him know I arrived. He get up rather quickly and with his eyes closed he begins to talk. He says they don't like him and they've been hurting him. I asked him who is they and he said the ones that stay there. I don't know why or how he's talking to me because he's not awake and it's starting to freak me out. So I asked who is they, and he said the ghosts. I said there's no such thing as ghosts, but then he gets excited and says they are here. Before I can ask another question he says the lights will go off, letting us know they aren't happy with me there. Sure enough, the lights in the living room turned off and everywhere downstairs. I'm thinking WTF is going on? My hubby then goes back down and starts sleeping. I stayed the night with him and he talked on and off again without opening his eyes, saying that they pushed him down the stairs and made his clothes fly out the closet. I tried to sleep but kept having weird dreams of an Asian family looking at me from the stairs. Finally morning comes, my hubby wakes up and asks what I'm doing there. I said you called me and asked me to come because you didn't feel good. He said he didn't remember calling me or the conversations he was having. A weird fucking night. I asked that he not stay there anymore and he didn't. When I was very young, maybe 4 or 5, we had a particularly nasty snowstorm that wiped out power for days. We lived in New England, in the middle of farmland, so while our neighbors were within walking distance, it was a short hike to get to them. I don't recall exactly what led to this, but my mother needed to visit one neighbor to lend them something while my father got the generator running. I wanted to go with her, so she put me on my snow sled and pulled me along that way. It was dark out, but when everything is covered in snow it sort of has this eerie blue glow to it. My mother had a flashlight. We got to the neighbor's house, she dropped off whatever it was they needed, maybe batteries or candles or something, I don't remember, and then turned around and head home. It was only 1/4 mile or so, but it was through the woods. When we hit the midpoint of the walk back, we both heard this horrifying howl/scream like something out of a monster movie. Best description I can give was in the movie Predator when the predator cauterizes its wound and screams, which echoes through the forest. My mother picked me up out of the sled and ran home. We both described the sound to my father, who didn't believe us. A week later we found a bunch of dead deer that had been torn apart just 30 into a wooded path near our house, and not by poachers/hunters. I've been around coyotes my whole life, they definitely didn't do this either. Coyotes will pick apart their prey and run off with pieces. This was 4 or 5 full-sized deer with large chunks missing and that's it. Our neighbor was a hunter, and we asked him about it too. He said he had heard some weird sounds but had no idea what it was either. I'll never understand what I saw that night. I had just graduated from university and a friend and I took an all-inclusive trip to Cuba. We shared a room, and had beds that were spaced about 2 feet apart. We'll call my friend Anna. On the first night, around 1 a.m., she wakes me up by saying, "What are you doing?" I sit up and look over at her. She's sitting up and staring at the foot of her bed, looking stunned. "Anna, you're sleep talking," I said. She looked over at me, and then back at the foot of her bed. She paused and said, "I thought I saw you at the foot of my bed." I convinced her she had been dreaming, and eventually we fell back asleep. The next day was normal. The following night was not. I woke up in the middle of the night. I knew something was wrong right away. You know the feeling, like a storm is about to hit and you know you need to get inside. It wasn't fear, just something was wrong, different. There was energy in the air. I looked up and Anna was standing at the foot of my bed. She was in her PJs, and her hair was down. Just like she had been when we tucked in. The thing that made me know something was off was that she was wearing her glasses. She never put her glasses on at night, even if she got up to go to the bathroom. That, and when I looked at Anna's bed, she was there, fast asleep. I sat up and stared at the Anna at the foot of my bed, then quickly glanced over to the Anna asleep in her bed. I did it several times, to confirm I was really awake. "Anna?" I whispered. The version of her in her bed stirred and groggily said, "What? Are you in bed right now?" I asked. At this point the Anna that was at the foot of my bed turned around and started walking across the room away from me. "Yeah," the version of Anna in her bed said. "I see you at the foot of my bed," I said. There was a silence from the Anna in her bed, processing what I had said. The other Anna continued walking away. "I'm going to turn on the lights," I said. I reached out for the switch beside my bed. At that moment the Anna walking away turned back and looked at me. She faded away about 2 seconds before I turned on the lights. For the rest of our trip we slept with the lights on. I have no idea what we both saw those 2 separate nights. It didn't seem to want to hurt us. Just observe us. I've had people tell me, "Are you sure you weren't dreaming, or had sleep paralysis?" And I understand why people think this. After all, that was my first reaction the night before with Anna. But I know I wasn't asleep. I know that I saw something. I just don't know what it was. My family and I had just moved into a 2-bedroom home. My sister and I were to share rooms, of course. I was 14 and she was 10 at the time. So we were always fighting. On like the 3rd night there, we were getting ready for bed and suddenly I started seeing black stuff floating. They were tiny. Naturally I thought I was dizzy. Before I could say anything my sister blurts out, "What the f-?" And I asked her, "You see it too?" These tadpole-like things were literally slowly floating and making their way down to the floor. One landed on my bed and we both got close and we could see the tail wiggling. I grabbed a pencil, that was barely sharpened, and gently touched whatever it was with it. And it literally deteriorated and turned into dust. There were about a handful and they were all wiggling by the tail. They also all fell apart. We never spoke about. And to this day have no clue what it was. I have two. One. When I was around 10 years old, 1993, I had a Sega Mega Drive and a football game I loved playing, Pele. It was like a diagonal scroller, and I was awesome at heading and volleying the ball all the way up the pitch as Brazil. On the menu screen there was a famous picture of Pele being held up by another footballer, Mega Drive Pele game with a very nice smile on his face. One day I turned on the Mega Drive after school and Pele's face was so angry. Like staring directly at me with his piercing his eyes and downturned mouth. It was scary as hell. I wasn't sleeping, I was wide awake and panicking. This was long before I had the internet or camera phone, but I'll never forget his angry face. Staring directly at me, I reached over and pressed the reset button and it didn't come back. I played that game thousands of times before and after that incident and never saw it again. I've googled Mega Drive Pele angry face with no results a few times. That always bugged me. 2. I was walking home from a GF's house at 5 a.m. before needing to go to work one Saturday morning. Granted I was quite hungover, but goddamn this was real. I got within 900 meters of my house, and just about to turn the next to last corner before my street, and ahead of me was a shadowy figure moving quite slowly, but I didn't think anything of him. Maybe a homeless guy, I pondered as I continued walking towards him. He was walking in the same direction ahead of me, but I was catching up with him easily. I caught up to him just before a little path to the left. If you're reading from Yorkshire, I mean a snicket, or a ginnel. About 200 meters before I got to him, he cut into the path, and as I saw him do it, I noticed he stayed where he was. Just inside the entrance. So I became very aware of him and stepped out into the road a little to keep a safe distance. There were no cars driving past at that time when I got to the person. They lifted up a hood, and it was a human. With a bird's face, like an actual bird's head, on a human. I don't know how else to say it. Really. I absolutely screamed at the top of my lungs and sprinted away as fast as possible. Called my best friend and told him about the birdman, and of course took my verbal kicking for being an idiot, and then went to work. Honestly, it was terrifying. I know it sounds insane, but I really saw a human-sized real bird's head on a human body. It made a screeching sound as it lifted its hood and exposed its face, and that sound actually was the most terrifying part, as it was so clear it wasn't human. One night while me and my partner spent some time at his parents' home with them, I was trying to sleep and I couldn't get comfy. I woke up at one point feeling like something was standing by the door and walking across the room towards the bed. I turned my phone torch on and shone it around the room and nobody was there. The room is quite open space but small, so there isn't anywhere somebody can hide at all, and the floorboards are bad in places so you can hear them creak when stepped on even lightly, so there was definitely nobody in the room. I turned my torch off and tried to go to sleep, but I then felt like something was standing over the bed in my face. I can see well in the dark around the bed area and nothing was there, so I rolled over fast and cuddled up to my partner and hid almost under the cover. What felt like an eternity passed and I felt I was overreacting, so I took the covers lower and stopped holding my partner as tight but still faced him, and a chill hit me, this wave of unease and terror, all the hair stood up, kind of fear. I felt a pressure on the bed as if somebody was to sit on the edge of the bed. The covers reacted like they were been sat on and pulled, and I felt the bed move and my body tip as if it would when, as I said, somebody sits next to you on the bed. I looked, nobody there, and I don't think I've ever held my partner so tight. It was like whatever it was had sat close to my lower back and was facing the wall away from us. I was about to freak when I felt the pressure on the bed go and the presence leave the room again. Nobody was there, not a sound. The next morning I told my partner and we joked a bit about it being one of the relatives from the 2 urns downstairs. We went down for some breakfast and my partner said to his mom that I got a bit of fight last night. His mom asked why and I told her. To be honest, out of all of us, my partner's mom is the most skeptic. She explains everything away or jokes about it, and I expected her to laugh or make some joke. But she actually went ice white and pale and just gave a nervous laugh. My partner, who was expecting her to joke too, asked what was up, and she said she was feeling uneasy because the same thing happened to her last night as well. She said she woke up and felt somebody was by the door, so wondering if it was my partner's dad coming back from the loo or something. She asked, "Are you okay?" but then heard my partner's dad snore behind her. She had tried to forget it, putting it down to trick of the mind, but then felt somebody standing over her, so she put the light on by her bedside and nothing was there. She too turned the light out and turned to face my partner's dad and then felt something sit next to her, the same as I felt. She said it sat facing away and then got up a few minutes later and the presence had left the room. My partner's mom might joke about stuff, but she wasn't joking that day. She's not the type to make jokes at your expense or to further freak you out. She knows I have serious mental health like anxiety and depression, and she wouldn't take a joke that far to creep me out, as she knows it would mess with me. She was been 100% straight about the experience. We joke about it now, but it was still one of the most creepy unexplained events for either of us. It's 3 a.m. and I'm in my front yard just smoking a joint chillin' when out of the blue down the road I see a dude walking towards me. In my neighborhood there's a bunch of houses behind me, but ahead is just construction. So now I'm thinking, was this guy sleeping in these empty wooden houses? He passes by me, and as he passes he mumbles something, but I can't really hear it good. He also sounds concerned, and as he walks on by I hear someone call my name behind me. I turn back and no one's there, but when I look to see where the guy went, he's turned around and walking back toward me. Freak the fuck out, I run inside and lock the door. I look out the window and I see the guy walking back and forth and eventually leave. Then I heard a knock at the door. I looked and no one was there. Creepiest night in a long time. One night last year I was taking a shower before bed. The glass in the shower door shattered, leaving shards everywhere and me with some cuts and no way to get out of the shower without cutting the soles of my feet badly. Luckily my wife heard and helped me out. The shattering glass is explainable. The door was hanging off the track for months. There must have been pressure on the glass and eventually it got too much. My own fault. In the hour and a half spent cleaning up the glass I realized there was some weird foreshadowing of this event. Earlier that evening I was putting my son to bed. He was 5 at the time, and out of nowhere he asked me, "Daddy, what are shards?" Earlier that week I was discussing music with some friends. We were talking about the Eurythmics. With that in mind I was watching some of their music videos that night. About 20 minutes before the glass in the shower door shattered, before my wife had to bring me my slippers so I could walk over the shards of glass without slicing up my feet, I was watching the video for Annie Lennox's Walking on Broken Glass. Once I threw a piece of candy at my friend's head as a joke. I wasn't as funny as I thought at the time. He spent the rest of the evening sneakily trying to get revenge. I was standing by my fridge during his first attempt. I can't remember why, but either as a joke or on a whim, I dodged backwards Matrix style right as a piece of candy smacked into the fridge in front of my face. I hadn't noticed him preparing to throw it. It was just amazing luck. I was still talking about it an hour later. I go, "Dude, that was crazy." I was just like, and then imitated the dodge just as another piece of candy comes flying at me, hitting the fridge where my face would have been a second time. I don't think he tried again. Not really creepy, but when I was about 14, I saw a UFO. An unidentified, flying object. My parents and me, as part of a larger group, were doing a 3-week kayaking trip down some small river in Ural. We were camping for the night on the shore of some lake. Me and a few other kids from the group were hanging out at the campfire late into the night, while all the adults went to bed. And we all saw a very large object rise from behind the trees across the lake, rise up into the air on what looked like 4 rocket engines, then tilt sideways sort of like a quadricopter and fly away behind the tree line. One detail that surprised me at the time was that the exhaust from the engines was pure white, without any yellow or red, and it left a noticeable glow in the air for about 10 to 15 minutes after the object left. When we told the story to adults in the morning, they didn't believe us at first, especially since various pranks and jokes were common on these trips. But we were insistent, and they promised to check with the locals next time we passed a village or a town. They did. There was nothing official in the local papers or on the radio. TV was not a thing in Ural villages at the time, but locals confirmed that they see things like that a few times a year, and that it is better not to ask too many questions about it and definitely not to look at it too closely. This was 1988 or 1989, USSR was in decline, but still holding up, and we all saw the wisdom of not sticking out collective noses where they were not invited. What was that thing? Who knows? My guess is that it was some sort of classified military or space installation doing some kind of experimental aircraft test. But we will never know for sure. Me and other people who were there that night are all in our 40s now, but we all still remember that night. For my 12th birthday, my mom got me and my friends a hotel room. We had just come back from the pool when I suddenly got this horrible feeling that something terrible was going to happen, and I started to cry and freak the fuck out. I was scared as fuck, and there was this random vein popping out of my forehead which had never happened before. Everyone eventually calmed me down, and me and my friends went in our room to watch TV. It wasn't even an hour later, when we were all just chilling in bed, when I noticed a huge red splotch, like a few feet wide, on the bed that had appeared out of literally nowhere, and it wasn't anywhere near where any of us were sitting. Obviously I started freaking the fuck out, and we called in our parents. We checked everyone to see if anyone was bleeding, and we all checked if we got our periods or something, but no one had, and no one was injured or bleeding for any reason. There was also nothing red that could have been spilled or anything, and the weirdest part was it had already seemed to have dried up yet also just appeared out of fucking nowhere. We even checked the vent above the bed. When we were taking the sheets off the bed, we also noticed tiny red spots up near the very top of the sheets and on some of the pillowcases. We ended up shoving everything in the closet and using extra blankets that were in the room. I don't even think my mom or my friend's mom said anything to the hotel staff. Lol. I have no idea what it was or if it was even blood, but at the time me and my friends were freaked fuck out, convinced our room was haunted, and I remember barely getting any sleep that night. When I was 20, I visited a town in Italy that has a number of medieval towers that you can climb. My girlfriend didn't want to climb any, so I went up one on my own and was the only person at the time doing so. It was a sunny day when I entered the tower. There was a flight of stairs that wound around the edge of the tower and no windows. Climbing the tower took at the very most 5 minutes, and at the top of the stairs there was a door onto the top of the tower. When I opened it, I found the weather had changed dramatically and was overcast and threatening. I forget if there was thunder or not, but I was genuinely concerned about lightning, being at the top of a tall tower in that weather. I cautiously climbed out onto the roof just to have a quick look before heading straight back down. The roof was surrounded with a sort of metal cage of bars. I heard some thunder and saw electricity arc between some of the bars, not a blinding lightning strike, just arcing. I decided that the tower was imminently going to be struck and descended as quickly as I could. At the bottom, I was surprised to find the weather was again sunny with a clear sky. My girlfriend could tell I was shaken, and was amazed when I told her I thought that maybe there had been lightning. The weather hadn't changed whilst I'd been up the tower. I've started to tell the story a couple of times, but it's just too weird to expect anyone to believe. I have literally no explanation. I since did a bit of Googling and I'm 90% sure this was the Torre Grossa in San Gimignano. It doesn't have a cage around the top, but there is a metal cage around the bells, and I guess that's what I remember. I was tripping acid on a golf course with 3 friends late at night. There was 4 of us and only one sober one, so this is how I know this is real. This was not an uncommon thing for us to do. We would regularly take nighttime walks through this golf course, which was in a fairly wooded area without any homes on it, which made it quiet, secluded and ideal for us. We had been out for a couple hours now, and it was right around 2 a.m. when I finally felt like I was starting to trip. We found a nice green that was on a sort of peninsula surrounded by a little creek and decided to just hang out and chat and look at the stars and such. I was standing off to the side with our sober buddy talking while our other friend and his wife were squatting by the water checking out the reflection of the moon about 15 feet away. Out of the corner of my eye I see my friend immediately stand straight up like he was scared and say, "Hey, there's a guy." I turn and look across the water, and there is this man leaning against a tree about 20 feet away from us, just staring. He must have been in his 40s. He was overweight, shoeless and shirtless, just staring at us with his arms crossed. We yelled at him, asking him what he was doing out there. Let me remind you, we are in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and there shouldn't be anyone out there. He didn't respond and just started walking towards us. In this moment I was thinking, we are going to have to kill this guy. Why is he out here? He must have been following us for hours. Our sober friend had already sprinted off without saying anything, so the rest of us ran too and never looked back. This was a couple years ago, and I still think about that guy regularly. I just want to know why he was there and why he didn't respond to us. It makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up just thinking about it. This isn't my story, but I was told it by my grandpa after my grandma passed away. We were just joking around and remembering the good times, and then my grandpa told me and my family about one time when my grandma was in the kitchen back when my parents were still kids. My grandma was in the kitchen cleaning the dishes. She heard a noise and turned around. Someone was walking through the kitchen. Just walking through, not focused on anything around them. Just walk through. She went out into the living room and said to my grandpa, "I think I just saw a monk." The internet did exist back then, and because my grandpa worked with tech, he had a computer with access to it. They looked it up, and it turns out that below their house, right underneath where the kitchen is, there used to be tunnels for monks to travel through to the local church. This is just a story from my grandpa, so it could be fake, but I don't see any reason why my grandpa would make up a story about this. I remember it sometimes, and it just kind of freaks me out for a second. Used to work in hotels. This one particular hotel was well known among those who worked in hospitality in the area for its paranormal events, but once you'd been there a while you'd get used to it. The events were rarely frightening. When I was hired, another employee had told me that our large ballroom was haunted, but I was just like, yeah, whatever. We were housekeeping, so we never had to go over there anyway. And then I switched jobs, and ended up working as the evening shift janitor, and some of my duties included cleaning the public restrooms and locking up at night. We'd had a week of wedding receptions. The ballroom was large enough that it could hold 2 or 3 smaller parties at a time, and every night for a week, we'd had at least one party going in the evenings. On Saturday night, the one reception is plagued by issues. Light bulbs are blowing out, breakers are tripping, equipment is malfunctioning. I felt bad for the bride and groom because of all the issues. Even the fire alarm went off at one point, triggered by one of the detectors in the ballroom ceiling. The bride and groom were in good humor about it all, they even posed for a picture with the fireman in front of their truck. Sunday rolls around. The hotel is quiet, and there are no events scheduled. I head over to lock up the ballroom, and that includes making sure all the lights are turned off. To get to some of the switches, I would have to cross the room to the opposite side. I walk in the door and just stop. It sounds like a cliche, but all the hairs on my arms and neck stood up. The atmosphere in there just felt really, really tense. I felt like I was intruding, and I just hastily backed out and closed the door. The lights. The 2 guys who set up audio/visual gear then showed up to set up part of the ballroom for a meeting the following day. They go into the ballroom. They promptly come right back out. One of them says it felt like something was physically stopping them from going any further. The other says he heard something growl something, but couldn't make out any words. I believed the stories about the ballroom after that. My town has a week-long festival called Ribfest. Bands every night of the weeks. Beer. And ribs. I've never gone to it. I just never had interest. I still haven't been there. Or at least I thought. My brother and close friend were talking about the time we all went to Ribfest. I was like, I've never been to Ribfest. They looked at me very confused. And informed me that yes, I have been there. With them. They both remember me being with them all evening. I thought they were joking. They weren't. I asked if I was really drunk or something. They said I only had a few beers and was fine all night. Just normal. It's been years since they told me I was there. I have zero memory of it. At all. I don't know what happened. Did something happen to me?